morning. Welcome to the April meeting of the Housing Opportunity Fund Advisory Board. I will pass it over to our new chair who started last month, Kelly Ware-Sebron, to run the meeting. And as you can see on the slide, ASL interpretation is available, and please pin the people on the screen to follow that.
Okay, great. So we're going to get started with a roll call. Lena Andrews.
Here.
Oliver Beasley.
Here.
Jamil Bay.
Here.
Joanna Deming. Knowledge Bode Hudson.
Knowledge is here, I saw.
Yeah. Jerome Jackson. Council President Teresa Kale Smith. Mark Masterson.
Here.
James Myers.
Here.
Paul Spradley. Sonia Tillman.
Here.
Derek Tillman.
Here.
Diamante Walker.
Here.
Adrian Wonaha.
Here.
I'm present. And Megan Winters.
Here.
Thank you. We will now go to review and accept the minutes from our March 4th meeting.
Make a
Do you
motion
have
to
any?
approve.
I'm sorry.
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstentions, objections? All right, so our minutes are approved. Moving on to public comment. Our registered public commenter is Megan Confer-Hammond from the Fair Housing Partnership.
Thank you, Kelly. Good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Confer-Hammond. I'm the Executive Director of the Fair Housing Partnership. And I am thrilled to start off April as Fair Housing Month with this meeting and able to announce, as you all know, and we'll be discussing later, that the inaugural meeting of the Fair Housing Committee was held in March, and it is the first step towards this application of an equity lens in the work that we all are doing here. And I am excited to also share that I found out last night that fair housing organizations on a national level are working with Congress on housing funding that is tied to race conscious and equity rules and language. And so I will be able to discuss that language and share it all with you, but happily, the vast majority of that language is what we are already discussing and what we are already applying. And so I am truly hopeful that this model that we are working on here and together will be something that can be potentially at the forefront of what the nation is working on as a whole. And so there's a lot of work left to do, but I certainly am a firm believer that we are all committed to it and that we will put that time and effort in to find these solutions for the systemic and historical bias that has caused such inequity that has been worsened by this COVID-19 pandemic. I will also bring to your attention that I am happy to see the landlord-tenant legal funds being discussed and reviewed today. I will hope that part of what we'll discuss as well is that the direct services to residents, including the legal funds as a new program, and HSP as well, while we're seeing the rent relief funds of the ERAP program go at the county level, I hope that we can spend this time addressing the concerns in which HSP and the rent relief and other assistance funds are having a difficult time in being made available to city residents, and for this to be a program that we can be proud of after COVID as a unique source for Pittsburghers to access housing stabilization funds, and that we can address the barriers in tenants and residents accessing those funds. And I will also share is that I will send out links throughout the month of April. If anyone is interested in collaborating or attending fair housing events as we commemorate the 53rd anniversary of the Fair Housing Act passing in 1968, and also share that FHP is part of 5 fair housing organizations in a filing against a senior housing provider in the private market in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and New York, who is discriminating against seniors by charging additional fees for seniors with disabilities and denying accommodation requests. So we have a lot of work to do, but I appreciate you all as allies in doing that work. So thank you all.
Thank you, Megan. Is there anyone else present who would like to provide public comment? Okay. With no further public commenters, we will move on to. I'm sorry, I didn't know if that was noise or if that was somebody raising their hand to speak. Okay, with no further ado, we will proceed down the rest of our agenda. That's right, my paper was down. Okay. So now our legal assistance program contracts is next on the agenda.
Can we go to the next slide? Okay, on February 19th, we released an RFP for the legal assistance program. We closed the RFP on March 12th and received 5 proposals. After an internal review, the proposed contracts are being considered for funding to operate the legal assistance programs. So for coordinated entry, Community Justice Project will subcontract Rent Help PVH and the Pittsburgh Hispanic Development Corporation to field calls for these programs and triage them to the appropriate legal assistance providers. These 2 community organizations have operated a similar service since COVID-19, helping residents understand the different moratoria, legal rights, and housing resources. The Pittsburgh Hispanic Development Corporation will primarily serve non-English speaking residents. Just Mediation Pittsburgh will serve as the sole provider for mediation services, as this is their expertise, and they have built relationships with other legal assistance providers over the last year. They will operate under their parent organization, Family Mediation Council of Western Pennsylvania. Limited legal consultation and full legal representation will be provided by Neighborhood Legal Services and Morant Law. Neighborhood Legal Services is a longstanding, established, and well-respected nonprofit providing free legal services to low-income residents across our region. Morant Law is a women and Black-owned legal firm specializing in real estate law and has been operating for 15 years. Community Justice Project will also provide limited legal consultation and full legal representation to undocumented residents and those who otherwise might not be eligible to be served by Neighborhood Legal. Neighborhood Legal Services and Ebony Law will provide Tangle Title services, and Neighborhood Legal will be the sole provider for foreclosure prevention services. We added a new component to this program, which will be outreach services. And so the Hill District Consensus Group is going to be providing outreach services for the program, including community education, helping people know about the program, meeting with tenants and courts, and providing additional housing and basic needs resources to residents interested in the legal assistance programs. Lastly, we have also allocated $10,000 of this budget to provide language interpretation access across all legal assistance programs, helping to ensure equitable access. There are 2 voting items for the board today. One is the proposed contract amounts on the screen, but additionally, with the proposals that we received and the ongoing need for legal defense with housing, we are also asking the advisory board to authorize us using $200,000 from the demonstration line item to make this program a $1 million budget. Are there any questions? Oh, I also have Kantara Morant with us on the meeting if there are any questions from the advisory board members.
I guess I have a question. I was trying to see what's the total number of families that'll be served projected. I'm not sure I was following that through the narrative that we got in the write-up.
Sure. Give me one quick second, Mark. Sorry. Projected is 1,324 households.
I have a question. I see there's a $200,000 ask to from demonstration dollars to make this a $1 million budget. What's the current line item at for the demonstration portion?
Bettina or Jessica, I can't recall.
It's on a slide near the end. I think it's about 800,000 because I think we
Yeah,
have
let me-
400,000, and then Corey O'Connor transferred another 400,000 in. Yeah. So right here you can see 2021 was 400,000, and then the additional 2021 was Councilman O'Connor's funding he transferred in for a total of 800. So if we take 200 from that, that will leave 600,000.
Okay.
Thought we had used Councilman O'Connor's additional monies in last month on the project in Squirrel Hill.
That's already been moved. You can see on this slide, Bettina has up that it was moved. A lot of it was moved from the HSP to the rental gap program, but you can see that 750. That 750 is what is being used for the Flats on Forward project.
Okay. Well, you know, that the math on that works out to $750 roughly a family, I think, which is, you know, if we can do that, I think that's going to be phenomenal. It's going to be some of the best money we can spend if we can keep people in their houses and not add to the folks that to the gap that we've got. So I'd make a motion to approve both this and the. Can we do one motion, or do we need two separate motions on the funding allocation?
I think we need two separate motions. I think we need a motion to move the 200,000 from demonstration to legal, and then we need a second motion.
Just a clarification, Jessica, we're not moving demonstration funds. We're just asking authorization to use the demonstration funds.
Yes, that is correct, because council allocated it as demonstration. So we need, Jeremy's right, we need to keep it as demonstration to be used for the legal assistance.
I will make a motion to use $200,000 of the demonstration programs to push this program up to $1 million.
Second.
I'm sorry, was that Councilman Kel Smith, or was that?
I think there was a few of us. So
Okay.
I don't think that's, yeah. I just wanted to make.
I heard Councilwoman Kel Smith, so we'll put her down.
Yeah, I heard you, but all of the boxes lit up, so I wasn't sure.
Sorry.
Well, we like it when there's an enthusiastic movement. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion passes. Do we have
Kelly.
I'm sorry?
Oh, sorry, go ahead. You were going to do the contracts.
Yes, and so I was going to do a separate motion to approve the contracts in these dollar amounts.
So moved.
Second, Teresa Kel Smith.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Any extensions? I would just additionally like to comment that I'm really excited about the slate of candidates, or not candidates, but of providers for these services. It's pretty exciting combination of folks. And so I'm excited to see what this program does this year.
Thank you, Advisory Board. Just want to give a quick note that we are moving at lightning speed and hope to launch these services by the next Advisory Board meeting.
That's great.
Wonderful.
And Jeremy,
Also goes-
you want to announce the extension to the moratorium?
Yes, so as probably most people know, the federal CDC eviction moratorium was set to expire yesterday. They did extend it through June, I believe, with some modifications to the rule. So if anyone's really interested, we can send around the documentation for that.
I think that'd be nice to have. All right. Next item on the agenda is Lorimer Phase 3 development, which is a rental gap.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Sarah Shore. I'm a lending analyst with the Residential Lending and Investments Unit. This morning, I'm going to talk about Larimer Phase 3 development. Larimer Phase 3 is the new construction of a mixed-use building with 32 new apartments and 4,800 square feet of commercial space, as well as the new construction of an adjacent 5-unit townhome building. And today, we will be asking for a rental gap program loan in the amount of $650,000 in HOF funding to fund this development. So if you want to go to the next slide. Just to walk through some of the program information, the borrower is a single purpose entity that's created by the Housing Authority, McCormick Baron Salazar, who's the developer, and the tax credit investor, which is Ohio Capital. You can see the location on the slide here, but it includes multiple vacant parcels and is along Meadow Street, Larimer Avenue, Winslow Street, and Stovner Way. The Larimer Consensus Group is the nonprofit applicant, and they were involved pretty heavily in the project development for all 4 phases. Ty Plus Lee is the architect, and Mystic is the general contractor. The MWBE plans have been submitted by the developer and are currently under review. The goals for minority business enterprise and women's business enterprise participation are 25% and 10% respectively. This Larimer Phase 3 is the final phase in a 4-phase HUD Choice Neighborhoods Development Initiative. Phases 1 and 2 were completed in 2016 and 2018, and they brought a total of 235 housing units to the Larimer neighborhood. In 2021, January of 2021, Phase 4 closed on financing, and the development team has begun to rehabilitate the historic Larimer School building. So this Phase 4 will bring 42 additional units of mixed income housing, as well as about 10,000 square feet of commercial space into the Larimer neighborhood. So with this 3-story mixed use building and the townhome I mentioned, Phase 3 will bring an additional 42 units to the neighborhood of housing. So at the end of the Choice Neighborhoods project, at the end of all 4 phases, there will have been created 319 units of housing, and 232 of these units will be affordable to households at or below 60% AMI. So of Phase 3 units specifically, 9 will be market rate units. The remaining 33 will be affordable units. Just to go into that breakdown a little bit, 5 of these units will be for 20% AMI households, 17 of these units will be for 50% AMI households, and 11 units will be for 60% AMI households. And as a result of the requested funding today, a deed restriction will be recorded on 17 of the units. 5 will be affordable to 30% AMI, and 12 will be affordable to 50% AMI. So just to walk you through the bedroom counts briefly too, there will be 31 1-bedroom units, 4 2-bedroom units, and 7 3-bedroom units. And because it is important to this committee and important to Pittsburgh development in general, 15% of the units will be accessible and visitable. In addition to the residential space, Phase 3 will also have 2 2,400 square foot commercial bays, and the space will be leased by the URA subsidiary PEIDC, which is the Pittsburgh Economic and Industrial Development Corporation. David Serban was recently voted in as the director of PEIDC. And the master lease is still being developed for the commercial space, but it's been anticipated that PEIDC will lease the space for $1 per year, And a tenant has not been identified for the space yet, but I know David Serban and the business solutions team, the development services team, as well as the Larimer Consensus Group have put a lot of time already into identifying a tenant. The thought is to issue an RFI for the space. The project's total development costs are a little over 19 million. To fund this project, Larimer 3 received 29% low-income housing tax credits. MBS, the developer, will continue to use HUD choice funds for the remainder of this phase, and the project is also receiving PHFA FAIR funds and pretty substantial housing authority investment. So today, MBS and the Housing Authority are asking the URA for funding that's in line with our 2019 commitment that we made for the LIHTC pre-application. And that is $650,000 in rental gap program financing to be funded through HOF 2020 source. It's a cash flow loan. It will have an interest rate of 0% and a term of 40 years. So as I mentioned, as a stipulation of this funding, a deed restriction will take place on 17 of these units. And I think here's a site plan and drawing. If you go to the next slide, you can see amenities for the space. You can see phase 3 is outlined in red there, and the other relevant phases are kind of highlighted. So with that, I guess I'll turn it over to Lindsay Evans, who is a representative from MBS, who's here today. I don't know if she has anything she wants to add, particularly as it relates to accessibility or the neighborhood at large.
Good morning, everyone. This is Lindsay from McCormick Barron Salazar. Sarah, that was great. I think you hit all of the major points, and thank you for presenting that information. A couple of points on the accessibility. We are exceeding PHFA and HOF requirements for accessible units in the project. We're also exceeding PHFA requirements for the sensory units on the project. And 50% of our extremely low income units are accessible as well. And if you have any additional questions from the advisory board, I'd be happy to hang out and answer those.
Hi, this is Adrienne Wanaha from the advisory board. I'm curious as to who's managing the tenant selection. The Housing Authority as a partner on this project, are they going to be managing a tenant selection? And what are the criteria that could potentially exclude tenants from the property?
Sure. The tenant selection is a multi-faceted approach. This is a choice neighborhood. So first and foremost, any displaced residents have priority to return to their housing. And the project does include PBV units, project-based voucher units, that are attached to that choice returning option. The other aspect of resident selection is based on income and eligibility. So depending on the unit income that's attached to the designation, and then McCormick Barron Management will be managing the property and working with the Housing Authority Housing Choice Voucher Program to identify tenants and get the project fully leased.
So just a quick follow-up, exclusionary criteria.
Exclusionary criteria is fully in line with fair housing requirements. So really it's just anything based on not meeting the application requirements. But beyond that, there aren't a whole lot.
You know,
Just Jessica, go ahead, Adrienne, finish your question.
But just as an overall HOF comment for us to be thinking about forward, tenant selection and tenant selection eligibility criteria is something we haven't looked deeply into. So I'm going to go back to Megan's comments to start our meeting this morning and really thinking about, are we creating barriers to housing? And I'm not suggesting that this development is, but I think it is something that as the HOF we might want to look at as we go forward with applications, what those selection criteria are in a bit more detail, so that we can ensure that we're not replicating barriers that have existed in the affordable housing community in the past.
Yeah, Adrian, this is Jessica, and Anissa is on from the Housing Authority, and Lindsay, of course, and they can probably talk about tenant selection in more detail. But I will say one thing about this particular project, being choice neighborhood, and the premise of choice neighborhood, for those of you that are newer to committee, the premise for choice neighborhood is housing people neighborhood. So when the Housing Authority and McCormick Barron got this award in 2014, it was for all three of those components. $4 million was specifically set aside for the people initiative. So those 137 households that were there originally have received intensive supportive services over the last 7 years. And Lindsay can probably speak to this more than I can, but I would suspect that those services help to handle anything that would have kept them from not being able to pass that test on the application, so it was very strategic in that. And I just real quick want to say one other thing, because for those of us that have been working on this project for years, I see Knowledge is on and others. I mean, this was awarded in 2014. The planning for this was done a couple years before that. And it's super exciting that this is the last phase. Like, this is, 333 units in. Bettina, if you can go back like 2 slides, there's a picture I just want to focus on. Yeah, right here. No, the one you had. That one. Like, you can see this is the new building, but on the side, that's the Larmer School that you see there. And for those of you, everybody drive by right now, because you see so much construction going on with the infrastructure. And then that Larmer School has sat vacant for decades in the community. So now we're going to have the school occupied with housing and commercial space. And then this building you see here will have the commercial space on the ground floor and the housing. And if you go down just a couple blocks down Larmer, that's where like all the other units are. So 150 units in phase 2 coming right out the back of the Target parking lot, and then 85 units in the first phase. And you'll also see the brand new park with the playground equipment in, and it's super exciting. Everybody can't wait, for us to put that fence down, which we're getting close. So with the weather breaking, it's just going to be a tremendous asset for the city. So I just wanted to kind of to put that out there, that this is it. This is the end, and this is truly a revitalization that has built 333 units.
Jessica, I would agree. And I think this project is a great time to focus, because we heard about 20% AMI, which we haven't heard in any project. We're hearing about these choice dollars, which again, we've rarely heard about in projects. So I think when we're having these great moments to highlight, is a good time for us to revisit, how we're benchmarking and what really looks like the gold standard. So thank you to the group. This is very exciting.
Yes, and to Adrian and others that function in this field a lot, I will say that as a city, we're looking at, because of the resources that came in for choice and for the people initiative, how do we duplicate those people initiatives, for other projects that don't have that funding stream coming in from HUD. And that's a, discussion that's been ongoing, and, I would love anybody's feedback on that.
Jessica, I have a question, since you've been involved with this for some time. Of those residents that have received the intensive services, the Larmer residents that have been, of them, I don't know what the original number was. How many of those folks have now been reintroduced to their neighborhood?
You mean like brought back to the neighborhood?
Brought back to Larmer.
So, I could jump in. So all the people, I think there's like only a handful of people who chose to not come back, but everyone, there was a lot of engagement, a lot of touch points because of the Choice Neighborhoods Project. Everyone has the right to return, and Urban Strategies did a great job working with the people in the Housing Authority to ensure that we kept in contact with all the residents. And I was there, but I was working on this project before I was at the Housing Authority, so I want to just echo Jessica's points that it was so exciting to see people from East Liberty Gardens, as well as Hamilton Larmer, because this one included people who were not Housing Authority residents per se, but they were in a footprint and they were given the opportunity to move back. And the people are excited about that as well. So I think it's just a small number. I don't remember the number off the top of my head. Maybe Anissa knows the number, but
That's what I'm trying to get a sense of, how many folks, say, okay, this is my community, I'm coming back, or I'm still here. Do we have any sense of what percentage, like, what does that look like? I know they've been engaged and some folks said, no, I've made my bones elsewhere. But do we have a sense of how are we thinking about the sets other than a lot of them?
okay, I'll get you a number. Oh, good. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Knowledge. I was just going to chime in that basically with the same answer. I'm happy to follow up with the case manager at Urban Strategies. We're working closely with them on both Larimer 1 and 2 that are fully occupied, and then 3 and 4 lease up as well. And we are happy to provide the data on the people program that is presented to HUD on a monthly basis. The numbers aren't at the tip of my tongue, but Knowledge's point of every single resident that was interested in returning, which is a very high percentage of the residents that were displaced, has chosen to return and was supported in that process. And a point of clarification on Urban Strategies work is they provide supportive services to all residents, not just returning residents. So every resident of the Larimer East Liberty CNI has access to those supportive services through Urban Strategies. And that program is funded through the compliance period of the tax credit program through operating budget. So it is fully funded for the future of the project and will not be going away anytime soon.
Right, so I'm trying to get a sense of how, so Jessica said that, as we think about, it's unlikely that we're going to have the opportunity to have choice fund dollars in other parts of the city anytime soon at scale. So as we're thinking about how we think about success, and success in my mind would be that folks want to return to the place where they were displaced from. Like, so if we were thinking about, okay, how do we solve that problem elsewhere without choice dollars? What is the benchmark? And so that's what I'm trying to get, like, other than a high percentage, like, okay, what is that number? And so we can think about, what future success could look like.
Sure. I would say personally and honestly, professionally, 100% is the goal. And that's the goal for Urban Strategies and specifically the choice program. But, it has been met, that goal of 100% return. If a resident wants to return, they have been given the opportunity to return. And we'd be happy to share our experience with funding sources across the country that have been implemented for these types of supportive services. We usually work with the choice program, but we have done other projects, and Urban Strategies has as well, separate from the choice program.
Because I think there's still value in the folks who chose not to return and understanding, okay, what supportive services help those folks acclimate to another place where they feel like they're thriving or have an opportunity to do better. So I think it's both. It's not just the only way to think about success is that everyone returned. What else can we learn and what else can we say that we can replicate or think about, just use these as lessons?
Absolutely. Great point.
And the county, Lindsay, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the county Department of Human Services has been very involved in this too. I mean, I actually works with them, correct?
Absolutely. The Allegheny County Department of Human Services is the transition manager for the grant. So Becky Gloninger is the main contact at DHS and is specifically the person who has been involved in the Choice project since before 2014 and has worked with those residents. So Urban Strategies has a team attached to the project right now, and DHS is the transition manager to the ongoing operations.
So the lessons learned through Larimer, DHS, can replicate in other places. Any other questions?
Yeah, I did. It's I think the project is great. If if we're really getting that number of folks returning, on the north side we didn't have that with some other projects that had happened, decades ago that a lot of folks wound up not returning to the neighborhood. So what's going on with that and having people, have that real choice and really are able to come back is fantastic. Some of those numbers are as high as we're talking about, and that's where the project winds up. My question is about where does, this is a loan, and maybe this is generic to all the projects that we're doing loans on. Where do the repayments go? Like to the URA? Do they come back through the Housing Opportunity Fund chute, or what happens to those funds when they're repaid?
Yes, so when they're repaid, they will come back to the URA and they would be treated as Housing Opportunity Fund repayment income. And we would report them as such.
Okay, and then in general, it's the URA policy on the origination fees that it's 2% of any kind of project-based financing that's going out like this.
Yes, for rental housing development.
And the for sale development program as well.
You know what? I have to look at the guidelines. Evan, I don't know if you know. Feel free to shout out if you do. But I have to look at the guidelines.
It's at 0 right now on the for sale development program, but we're
okay.
We're revisiting if we need to charge an origination fee on that.
Okay, thank you. I'll make a motion to approve the project as presented. If but I don't want to. Somebody else wants to make the motion, they can go right ahead. But there's no more discussion.
I need to abstain from the vote. This is Derek Tillman.
Oh, that's a good point. Who needs to abstain?
I think I'm going to abstain too, right? This is Knowledge Hudson.
Sonia Tillman. I need to
Derek,
abstain.
Knowledge, Sonia.
These are 2020 allocation dollars, by the way.
I heard of me too, but I don't know. Oh, is that
Me? Yeah.
Okay. So we have 4 abstentions.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay. Any additional abstentions? Any nays? Okay, motion passes.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Next up on the agenda is advisory board administrative items. We're going to start with a report out of our first Fair Housing Committee meeting. Lena?
Oh, actually, I didn't take any notes, but I'll do a quick beginning and then Kelly, you can jump in with what I'm missing. But we had a really productive first meeting of the Fair Housing Committee. Thank you, Megan, for joining our board members on it. We talked a lot about sort of the need to define what a fair housing lens looks like for us and whether we want to have a focus of setting goals for the overall work of the Housing Opportunity Fund, or if we want to go program by program and sort of set goals related to fair housing for each of our different Housing Opportunity Fund programs. And I don't know that we came to a final decision on that, but we did talk a lot about it, and we are going to also nominate a chair, which we haven't done yet, but we will. So yeah, I think we all acknowledge the importance of defining what this looks like, and there's sort of a not conflict, but the macro level thinking of seeing everything through the fair housing lens versus like defining actual metrics that impact our work. That's sort of where we ended up. So Kelly, do you want to add anything to that, or Adrian or Derek?
Sure. I guess what I would add to that is that we talked a little bit about fair housing from a legal framework, and then also fair housing as we think of it as broadly meaning things that are equitable and just, and how we want to use the expanded lens and not just, protected class, just the protected classes. And we were trying to identify, I think what came out to be about 5 things that we want to keep in mind to kind of use as a grid to lay all of our programs and services over, which would be protected classes, economics, which is not necessarily a protected class. So again, the expanded view, access to resources, targeting, and then the overall impact on on all communities involved of our actions. So I guess that's the only additional piece that I have. We also were discussing building in a fair housing piece and brief report from the Fair Housing Partnership into every meeting, so that if there is something, so that Megan and or Fair Housing Partnership is not just public comment, but kind of, hey, this is what's going on, the scope of either nationally or locally as it relates to fair housing, to help us center our work, so that if there is something in our agenda that they want to dive into specifically, they're not precluded from that by having already spent from doing one or the other because they have 3 minutes. So those are some of the things, my only additions to Lena's overview. I don't know if anybody else has anything that they wanted to add.
Just one more thing. We also discussed that, the fair housing discussion and lens reaches beyond just housing, that it touches on, economics, home ownership, really just everything. So even the organizations that we contract with, so that it really needs to touch on everything, not just from a programmatic level, but from a systemic kind of institutionalized level. So that those are just part of our discussion as well.
Thoughts for the committee? Suggestions, recommendations?
What are the next steps?
Yep, so the next steps were, we're going to continue to meet monthly. We're going to select our chair, and also generating a list of any additional, what I guess would be ex officio members, which would be like Megan Confer-Hammond, because the bylaws do state that in order to be a full member of a committee, you do need to be an advisory board member, but there are other people who have expertise that we would like to bring to the table. So we're looking to see what that expanded list may look like. So we're taking suggestions for that as well, and generating a list of suggestions amongst ourselves. But our next meeting will be later this month. But we doodle poll pending. So that's our next steps for us.
Just a quick comment that I think it's great that you all are looking beyond sort of those protected classes and thinking more fully about what fair housing could and should be for the city. I think
well, if there's nothing else, we wanted to discuss, go back to our discussion last month about additional committees, because if fair housing is in everything, we can't actually do the work of this core team can't do absolutely everything. I do believe that we discussed taking the RFP committee off of the list. I believe was the consensus of the last meeting, and move towards more of a scoring model around different criteria. But we can have discussion about that if that's not everyone else's understanding. But we do want to have conversation about these other potential committees and whether or not we want to create them. If we want to create them, then populating them amongst ourselves, and then moving forward. So the first one was marketing and outreach, focusing on underserved markets. I believe this is where some of that affirmatively furthering fair housing piece would come in, where we're talking about, to Adrian's earlier question about, hey, how are you finding these tenants? What's the criteria? How are you marketing to them? I believe would go under here. Sustainability committee, make sure that we, there were two different aspects that we were talking about that. One potentially being sustainability in terms of being able to stay in your home for indefinitely, as long as you want to be there. And then the other obviously being the more green initiatives so that we're staying, building and creating and renovating in a way that is green, so that for healthy communities. And then the last one is wealth building initiatives and homeowner opportunities. And this kind of comes back to some of those pieces that Derek had mentioned in terms of thinking beyond just the housing itself, but what does that mean from a banking perspective? How are we going to close or do anything equitable about the homeownership gap, knowing how the banking industry, how the banking industry is. So we have to perhaps go a little bit further upstream as well, for this. So these are, I think, the three that jump out at me as what we should perhaps dive into first. Obviously, we can eliminate some, add to, but that's just a starting place of where I want to discuss additional committees. Does this seem like a good starting place? Do we have something on here that people think shouldn't be on here? Do we have a gaping hole?
It just feels to me, this is Adrienne speaking, it just feels to me that with fair housing and then 3 additional committees, the bandwidth for the board itself to have participation with that many options just feels at the moment a little daunting as we're planning for, larger issues that definitely these items touch into. But I keep feeling like process, protocol, strategies for the board itself, we're not that far away from looking at funding for the next year. It feels to me right at this moment that we have a lot of work to do as a board on those core items of getting the board to the optimal functioning in process. To then be adding on subcommittees just feels a little overwhelming at the moment. And I may be the only board member thinking that. And again, all of these are going to inform that larger planning that the advisory needs to do overall, but I think that there's still burning questions about how we operate and how we're using funding and our criteria related to putting out RFPs and approving those as a group. I'm just trying to wrap my brain around also operationalizing all these committees.
Oh God.
I was just going to add, also with the Fair Housing Committee really just launching, I feel like, that foundationally will drive, and further define what committees are needed. Like, it seems like wealth building should come out of, policies and decisions, that come from the Fair Housing Committee. Same with sustainability. So when I think about sustainability, I think of things like environmental justice. I also think of, the green and the built environment, things like that, which again is directly connected to fair housing. So I feel like let fair housing, define some of these things a little bit more, and then we maybe revisit sustainability, wealth building. If anything, and I agree, I think the consensus was to eliminate the RFP committee and go more towards scoring. If anything, marketing and outreach may seem like, okay to start now, because we can, get the word out about existing programs, existing, services, etc. But yeah, I don't think we should add too much more. So, yeah.
So I'm hearing 2 things. And one concern that I have, speaking of bandwidth, is if we pack everything onto the Fair Housing Committee, then where is the bandwidth of that organization, of that committee, if it's also thinking about these other things? So that's just one bandwidth, I guess, counterpoint or question. And the second is, it sounds like I'm hearing what may be a subcommittee around operations for the advisory board, if that's an ongoing concern of how are we going to do these things, that's not something that we're necessarily going to be able to dive into and make on the spot recommendations on these monthly calls as, you know, as a body while we're moving forward with additional business. So those are just two things that I'm hearing that I want to feedback out to the group as potential concerns or suggestions.
Well, just from my perspective, I certainly don't think the Fair Housing Committee can or has the bandwidth to try to do everything. I don't think that's the intent. I think it's really to develop a certain set of metrics that can, you know, really help, you know, influence and be incorporated into additional subcommittees. But those metrics really are almost like a prerequisite to help define some of these other subcommittees' work.
I also want to say, I'm not sure where this fits, but as we talk about operations maybe, and as, I mean, I think there's obviously a need to always focus on underserved markets when we're talking about implementation of our programs, but it feels like there's a bottleneck already in our implementation. Like it's not an outreach or a knowledge question on potential clients or customers, but that we have a bottleneck on our end, and also in making sure that people get the right information from 211, from URA staff, maybe that somewhere there's a bottleneck that is stopping people from accessing programs in a timely way. And I'm not sure that that's been fully addressed.
Sonia, are you suggesting a committee to look at existing, you know, programs and how we could, you know, improve upon some of the processes?
No, I'm not suggesting another committee. I think that as we think about this marketing and outreach, we just need to make sure that we're not piling on to a different problem, right? We can reach out to people and make sure that they are understanding or aware of the programs. We can make sure that they even submit applications. But if we have a bottleneck someplace else and those applications don't get processed, do we really help?
Well, I guess I would kind of look at, yeah, this is a lot to look at right at this second. You know, I think fair housing has got to be a metric that we're using, we're measuring, and we're judging outcomes and whether we've succeeded or not, and whether the partners we've picked are succeeding in that metric. That stuff feeds into RFPs. We're going to be doing RFPs this year. You know, we're going to have a competitive process. So that doesn't have to be a heavy lift, but we should be looking at that. You know, it would be great to have a group that, you know, could dig into some of this stuff with the staff to get a little bit more detail on, hey, here's the sort of things that we're looking at. I think we've got kind of a start. Whether we use it or not, we started out with a scoring metric that we really didn't need to use because it wasn't a very competitive process. As we had money to give out, we were trying to get projects moving quickly. So that kind of makes sense. I hear what Adrian's saying is that it's really sort of an operational piece. You know, that's something that I would actually look for some staff, Jessica and the staff. You know, we've certainly staffed up. Let's get some guidance for what they think are the strengths and the weaknesses, or what we've got to look at and try to address as an advisory board. You know, if we've got bottlenecks, you know, does that take more resources to eliminate the bottlenecks, or have we just not got the right partner, or is it a problem that we can't solve here? And kind of looking at those things strategically. But I would say that the RFP and the fair housing are two things that we have some time push on, just the nature of where we're at with the fund.
And that's, I guess, kind of the urgency that I have, is that we are into 2021 dollars in a competitive process next month. And so if we don't have any metrics around any of these things built into that process, then when do we implement it? Do we start getting money out the door for 2021 without these things in place? And then try to catch up later? And we were just a little bit challenged from that aspect of we're into 2021 dollars next month.
Well,
And again, we will need some URA staff support on this, but to that end, we did have Bettina present on our fair housing call. And I imagine that, with scheduling, if we can get them notice, somebody from the URA staff will be present and able to dive in with anybody on any of these issues.
I think the fair housing, it's got to focus on, the program, however you guys are deciding as a committee to recommend how we focus on that. It doesn't mean that stuff can't get plugged into the RFP process. But the RFP, I think we need to look, there's other things that are in the RFP that we should look at, and we're going to have to use it. And I'd rather, have the board have some input into, hey, here's how we're going to score these things. What does everybody think? Before we have it out there. That would be awesome if we could get something like that next month to start, at least to see it and start looking at it. So I don't know how you want to proceed, but I would say that the two committees we need now are RFP and fair housing. And it's, it's not a silo, it's that the fair housing stuff needs to look at what criteria needs to be included in the RFP around fair housing.
Is that a motion to form a committee to look at our RFP and scoring process?
I think as long as we're thinking about RFP in a much broader sense, it's not one RFP, it's not one scoring criteria. It's how the advisory is looking at all of these dollars across all of these programs with all of the partners. So it's the bigger picture operationalizing what we think is the most important, globally related to what's being accomplished with the dollars, what the goals of the legislation are, and then translating those down into RFP cycles, actual RFP content, and then scoring. So again, I'm looking at the RFP committee when it was first talked about is really just related to the scoring, but I think it's bigger than that. And I'm sorry, Derek, I may have jumped in before.
I think you touched on a lot that I was thinking. RFP, I think the name is somewhat confusing or complicated, because again, like specifically with some of the programs, if it does go to RFP, and I think this was why we decided to go away from RFP and focus more on scoring, it could actually cause problems with projects moving forward. So again, if it's looked at more on it, and again, this is program by program, but really developing a scoring metric more so than an RFP, depending on a program, then I think it makes sense.
Well, I think if anybody has any renaming suggestions, we can take those into account before and then have a motion to name for whatever the name of the committee is, looking at these issues. I don't have anything catchy. That's what I came up with.
Echo what Derek was saying as far as the scoring versus the RFP process, as it relates to because I was under the impression that there were some projects based off of Line Tech and based off of already in city and URA invested time and money that it just made sense to come up towards the board earlier. So I thought that's why we leaned away from the RFP process. But the scoring process, I think Marcus mentioned this before, and I know the URA does a good job of actually scoring the products before we see them. So I think that's what you all are speaking about. And if that is the case, then are we saying, okay, we get the projects X amount of time before we have this criteria and then our score goes along with the URA suggestion, or like, what's the weight of our score, as it relates to the URA suggestions, because they have a global perspective of what's going on. So, or the staff that is,
I think the conversation was around what that was around, maybe the rubric itself is, does the rubric have, do we want to add additional pieces? Are the right pieces in there so that when they come up with a recommendation, is it based on the questions that we want the answers to? And I think that's what the conversation was about, is it advancing our goals as a HOF, as we determine as an advisory board, of course, consistent with legislation and whatnot.
And clearly, fair housing is important to all of us. So that, ensuring that's robust and baked in a comprehensive way. So that alone would change the metric to some degree.
But to like the sustainability piece, for example, I'm not a sustainability expert, even though I have sustainability in my job title. I'm working on it, right? But for example, there's not a current requirement in our programs that if you're doing a reno, that you do like replace your lead pipes, right? But that may be something from a fair housing, equitable justice perspective that we would want to include. That's just what's coming top of my mind as a person who is newish to the sustainability spaces, that's something that we would probably want to put, if we're building for, low income families, we want to make sure that we're not putting them in lead in that situation. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I'm sure people who are living and breathing in the sustainability space would have additional, is it the equivalent of a Harmony paint? I don't know. But there's something like that they would probably want to put into the scoring metric that fair housing folks would not necessarily have, but we don't want to go through another year perhaps without having those things built into our scoring metrics. I'm not sure if we've ever, as a committee, dove deeply into that. Maybe we want to have an all committee, special session to do this rather than form another committee. But I do think it's something that we need to pay attention to this spring as it gets more competitive and it's more of a how to do this than it should we.
I'm in support of a special session. I can't join another committee, but I definitely have a lot to offer. In the sustainability space is really, looking at things like climate control, how one of the biggest polluters to our environment is actually homes. But what can we do to help to reduce the carbon footprint? It looks at things like green development, things like passive house, reducing energy efficiency, which ultimately reduces utility costs and living expenses for residents, which improves their quality of life, and then other green development principles and practices. So if it's a special session, I certainly would look to attend and provide some input. But I also want to put on the table and challenge us to think about sustainability beyond green development and the built environment to sustainability of programs, sustainability like, we're helping families with the HSP program. How are some of the organizations helping to ensure that the family is actually being in a better place, so just things like that to help drive sustainability from those perspectives. I think we need to think about as well. So just want to kind of expand our thought process beyond green development.
I think we also might be a little farther ahead of where we think we are. I mean, I've responded to the application for Rental Gap, and it has a lot of requirements attached to it, and the scoring has a lot of metrics related to sustainability. I mean, the last time I did it, it was using the P4 metric, which I think has shifted a little bit, but P4 was very comprehensive at looking at metrics across all different parts of sustainability. So I don't know where the URA is going to end up with that with the new RFP, but that we've already have a lot of metrics in our scoring that I think cover a lot of the things that we're talking about. And I'm not saying we can't go farther, but I think we'll be surprised. I mean, I haven't seen the draft RFP, but if it's based on what I've responded to in the past, it does cover a lot of these things. And I agree with Derek. I don't know if we need a whole committee. I think if the URA sent out, because the RFP is just for the rental gap, is that correct? I just want to make sure I'm understanding.
Well, I think that's part of the conversation is around how we're scoring all of our projects. If it's rental gap, if it's the homeowner initiative, that we put a lot of money into not a lot of units on Black Street because it was a really fancy, project from a sustainability perspective. So I think that's part of the conversation is what's our criteria for the different programs? How are we deciding what's recommended and what isn't, and diving into that criteria. But I think a special session would work, at least preliminarily, and seeing if that, what's outstanding, and if there's more work than can be accomplished in a special session, then we know, whoever's gung-ho at that point can go with God and make, form a committee, perhaps. I don't know if I'm allowed to make a motion or if I need to wait for someone else. Do we have a motion around a special session to dive into our application process for our various programs? Okay.
I would make that motion.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Wonderful. We have.
Excuse me, Kelly, this is Victoria. For the minutes, who made the motion and the second?
That would be Sonia made the motion, Lena made the second, and yep, that's all we need. Okay, now we have an update on Own Pittsburgh from the URA.
I have one more voting item I would like to bring as a walk-on if you would allow that.
Sure, John.
So the walk-on item I want to request is to amend the HSP guidelines. In December of last year, this board voted to increase the maximum assistance to 6 months using CDBG funds for homeowners only. I'm asking for a guideline change to change that for renters as well, so that we can issue more assistance using the CDBG funds. So the action is to amend the guidelines to be a maximum of 6 months using CDBG.
I would make the motion to adjust the HSP guidelines to allow for a longer maximum, to allow for a longer rental period to be covered.
I would second that. All those in favor?
Aye.
I have a question. I thought your request was to add renters, not to extend the time frame.
The request is to extend the time frame for renters from 3 months to 6 months.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So that it mirrors what's currently in place for homeowners?
Correct.
Any other questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
It's quiet.
Aye.
Okay. Like other than Mark? All right. Any opposed, abstentions? Great.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Kelly, one more time. Who was the second on that?
Megan, I think it was me, Megan Winters.
Yes, Megan Winters.
Right, I actually may need to abstain. I forgot it because Action Housing's involved in this program.
Okay, so Lena abstains. Anybody
Oh,
else?
then I guess maybe I do too.
Sonia.
This is Sonia.
All right. And now Own PGH.
Yes, so this is just a quick update. I'm not sure if any of the advisory board members were watching the URA board meeting last month, but at the board meeting, we talked about a new program that the URA is rolling out called Own PGH, which is really a focus on, affordable home ownership. This advisory board has talked about the disparity in the city between the races and the percentage of home ownership. And the URA really wants to begin to, focus on this issue and tackle this issue. So we went to the board last month for a bond inducement, which is really just the first action to enable the URA to pursue the issuance of a bond, which would be used, the proceeds of the bond would be used to fund mortgages throughout the city through our banking partners. And the URA would bring some of its own funding to the table for second position mortgages. And when we had talked about this at the board, we are, like I said, in the early stages, we were looking at potentially doing this really to help with acquisition rehab, because there is a need for that. But as we all know, there's also a need to be able to get houses very affordable. So currently right now, our program concepts are kind of as follows: to increase the affordability of home ownership for low to moderate income buyers, to develop a first mortgage product, to lower traditional lending barriers, and then greater leverage our down payment program and potentially other second mortgage assistance, with the goal of writing down that amount of the first mortgage so that people of lower incomes can afford the first mortgage. And the big sort of one of the big things here is by doing that, by writing down first mortgage amounts, will help people get into the 80% of loan to value so that they will not need mortgage insurance. And that saves a pretty sizable monthly amount. Also to provide buyers with below market financing for needed home repairs, and to provide first-time homebuyer education and support. So those are sort of the goals of the program. We are taking this next month to kind of iron this out. And there are rules that we need to follow. I mean, this is a tax-exempt bond issuance. So there are some IRS and federal rules we need to follow. We have a financial advisor that is helping us with this. But we are trying to iron out those program concepts. And I just wanted to give everybody a heads up. We would like to take the month to do this and take program guidelines to the board in May, to the URA board. This is not a HOF advisory board. I won't need a vote at the advisory board, but I did want to update you and also ask if anyone is interested in participating in any, working sessions we have with this. A lot of the CDCs have expressed interest to work with us on this. We'll be holding a couple, so please email me if I would like to have, a couple representatives from the Housing Opportunity Fund Advisory Board. Diamante, I don't know if she's still on or not, but she mentioned, this advisory board at our URA board meeting as well as being critical to help us, figure out the parameters. Are there any questions?
Jessica, is this, I know that some of the criterion things may be different, but the way the bond issue works, it's really very similar to how the PHOP program had worked in years past. It's a mortgage revenue. Basically, it's a bond issue. You can get maybe a lower rate. You use to repay the bond, you're getting mortgage payments that will go to repay the bondholders in its simplest form.
So yes, Mark mentions PHOP, the Pittsburgh Home Ownership Program. That was the name of our previous bond issuance program. So, I mean, for example, I can tell you when I purchased my home 15 years ago, I called a lender and the lender said, oh, you might qualify for the city's, first time home buyer program. And that lender was a partner of the URA. I didn't know that at the time or anything like that, but they were a partner of the URA, right? And that's really the intent here, is if somebody, we'll work on getting lenders. We'll get 4 or 5 lenders, and somebody calls one of those mortgage lenders, and tells them, their income and so forth. That lender should say, oh, you could qualify for this. And then the only thing, Mark, I would say is this is probably a little bit, for those of us that have been around a while, this is a little bit quasi between PHOP and HRP, potentially. That's what we're looking at. Those of you that are around with HRP, that was a program that helped people acquire and rehab. Our board has expressed, interest to really focus in on affordability. So right now we're kind of in the position of, we would like to help with the rehab, but we really want to help with the affordability. So in addition to a PHOP type of first mortgage, what can the URA bring to the table in the form of a second mortgage to get the first mortgage even lower for affordability purposes? And is there a way to partner that with a rehab component? That's what we're looking at right now, with the focus being, probably more on affordability right now. That's what we're looking at, and that's what we're going to be meeting about over the next month. Any questions on that? If people are interested in participating, please email me.
I think, it's a good start, and maybe it's something that we can, there may be several things that we could do with this to get this, to accomplish a couple of goals. Affordability, definitely, that's just a matter of money, right? So how do we find more money? But also, starting to get to some neighborhoods that we haven't had a lot of penetration, maybe in development, like redeveloping vacant and abandoned houses, or trying to do new construction on vacant city-owned lots. There's a lot that gets packed into that, but maybe if this is going to be kind of a recurring thing that we're able to do, and we should be figuring out what happens if we do get funds for affordable housing through the current administration's infrastructure plan, which is, that's one of the central themes of it. Let's position ourselves to succeed in the city. We can do affordable housing. We can get long time vacant and abandoned buildings rehabbed and affordable homes for folks. So this is exciting.
Anything else?
No, I definitely agree with Mark, and also, I'm familiar with the old program, and I really do like the idea of doing what we can to incorporate giving community folks the ability to rehab houses in their communities, because that ties directly into the affordability piece, is who can afford to fix that house in your community, and what are they going to sell it to you for? So they really are intertwined, and I look forward to conversations about that moving forward. Is anybody else on Own PGH? Okay. And now I guess we, because we bumped this up on the agenda, would be programmatic expenditures and impacts.
Sure. So, these slides are work in process. Bettina's been creating new slides, based on comments from the advisory board. So here's our down payment slide. The way I have my screen, I have everybody's photos in front of it. Okay, so here's the down payment slide. 73% of the funding is committed right now. So we are, expending through this at a pretty fast rate. I mean, this has definitely been a program that has increased since COVID. You can see 193 households served. I think we celebrated our 100th anniversary like last summer. So we've really, the last 6 months have been very speedy on this program, with almost 100 households helped in 6-month period of time. And you can see sort of the information there. Next slide. And then homeowner assistance program, we're pretty much fully committed here. We still have still on hold for the acceptance of more applications until we can work through our waiting list. It's taking about a year to get people through the waiting list right now. 232 households are served through this program. Jeremy, is there any highlights here you want to report?
The only thing to report here, and we'll have a little bit more for you at the May meeting, is that we are working through Roofathon 2021, which is happening in May and June of this year. So we're going to bring those contracts to you next month.
Great. And here, you know, this one is pretty similar to what we showed last month, the rental gap program and for sale development program. We do expect in the next couple months to receive a couple more applications for the for sale development program. You also see more in the rental gap program, as I discussed last month. Next month, you'll probably see the final two 2020 tax credit deals. But we have been told by some CDCs and developers that they are working on applications for the for sale development program as well.
So Jessica, on the rental gap, because development takes forever, we're probably just getting to the point where some of these projects are finished. And it would be really exciting for us as a board to see photos, or I know we haven't had a lot of ribbon cuttings because of COVID, but I just know this because Center Avenue was one of the first funded projects and it's almost done. So I think it would be great to ask some of the developers who've got funding that are finished to share sort of images of the final product for us to see.
Great. We can absolutely do that. And that actually reminds me, we can try to get a developer to for each meeting for the next couple of months. Next month also, just to let everybody know, we also will probably have a presentation from HRA advisors who have been hired by the city to update the city's needs assessment. And they are in the process of updating that. And some of the people on the screen here are part of the city's Forging PGH working groups, and HRA is helping with that, but they did specifically request to meet with you also, so that'll be on the agenda either in May or June, probably May. Next slide. Here's the programmatic expenditures and impacts. So, you know, you can see this does not include 2021 money. We do not physically have the 2021 funds yet. So this is 2018 through 2020. As I said, the remainder of the rental gap will be committed over the next couple of months, and we are expecting some for sale applications in, and the homeowner assistance program. That number, we just don't know how to clearly show it because all that number, that 1.9, is needed to get through the waiting list. And then so the down payment has 460,000 left, and HSP has 3 million. Okay, and then program expenditures and impacts. Here you can see how many households we're helping. Sorry, how many households we're helping. Pretty similar to last month, but you can see the numbers keep increasing.
Jessica, could you go back a slide?
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe one of the things that'd be helpful is to add another column between closed committed and not yet committed to pipeline or something. You know, if you know that 2.76 million is going to be used in projects that have gotten low-income housing tax credit, you know, there's got to be a way that we can reflect that. It's because it's really, you know, it's not. You know, you don't want to turn down that those funds that are hard to get from the state. So I don't think that the Housing Opportunity Fund Board is going to say, oh no, don't do those deals. So maybe that's another way to better reflect as to what's really available.
Okay, that's a really good suggestion. We can work on that next month. I also realized while we're back on this slide, the HSP number is includes the CDBG, the COVID CDBG, and I want to mention that a second. You see the additional resources column there to 3.765. That is COVID CDBG funding. That also includes $1 million of mortgage assistance funding, and I just want to do a public announcement here. Please, through everybody's networks, please get word out that the URA through Action Housing and Urban League have mortgage assistance funding through CDBG COVID money for people impacted by COVID that are having trouble paying their mortgages, because this money is actually, we're not expending it quite as fast as originally anticipated. And I think in part that's because banks are doing an amazing job working with people on their mortgages, and restructuring their mortgages during COVID. But if anybody knows of anyone that needs the program, please refer them, because we would like to expand that program faster. Okay, next slide. Okay, so that's really it for updates. The next HOF meeting is scheduled for Thursday, May 6th. Kelly, you have anything else? Here, oh, and here's upcoming events. Bettina, you want to do this?
Sorry, it took me a minute to get off mute. So this is just a timeline for some upcoming events. So the HOF annual report is coming up, and that's due June 30th. So on the screen, you'll just see the timeline that we've established to make sure that we meet that deadline. So we did issue an RFP to our current slate of community outreach and marketing firms that were pre-approved by the HOF board and the URA board. So we're looking to hire a firm by mid-April, and then to have that finalized, printed, and distributed by mid-June. And then also the HOF annual allocation plan timeline. So this, again, we want to make sure we have ample time to get community feedback. So we are starting the planning process now, and we anticipate issuing the community outreach RFP in May, doing the actual community outreach process throughout June and July, and then spending September and October approving the draft annual allocation plan, so that it can go in front of the URA board and then to city council towards the end of the year and in November and December. Does anyone have any questions or comments about these two upcoming events?
Thanks, Bettina. If nobody else has any questions, does anybody else have anything they need to share with the group before we conclude? Do you have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
All right. I don't believe we need a second to adjourn.
I'll second it.
So,
Need it.
all right.
It's an easy
He did it,
one.
but it doesn't hurt. All right. So I guess we'll see everybody. I would say next month, but probably in the intervening month at the special session, and then the Fair Housing Committee will obviously be meeting at some point in the interim. All right. That's all we've got. Thanks, everybody.
Great, thanks.